The initial political promise was clear, a brief 4 to 6 week military intervention. But right now, we are entering the 20th week of an entrenched, sprawling quagmire. Look at this chart tracking global oil prices. Over 20 weeks, we see a steady climb, culminating in a sharp spike. That jump is a direct result of the naval blockade, slowing commercial shipping to a virtual trickle. To try and break this deadlock, the U.S. military has shifted its tactics. Instead of strictly conducting operations under the cover of darkness, they've launched an unprecedented barrage of bombing raids in broad daylight. And the rhetoric is escalating alongside the airstrikes. President Trump has issued direct warnings that he will order attacks on civilian infrastructure, specifically bridges and power plants, unless they negotiate. Iran's response has been to widen the target area. Neighboring countries like Bahrain and Kuwait report intercepting incoming missiles aimed at U.S. military assets, while Tehran threatens to expand its attacks to shut down other global oil routes entirely. A conflict originally sold as a quick maneuver to secure regional stability has now backed both sides into a corner, pushing the global economy to the edge of a severe energy crisis. The most confusing part of this entire situation is that a ceasefire deal was already signed. It was supposed to set the stage for peace, but almost instantly the agreement collapsed and triggered the current surge in violence. The breakdown stems from Clause 5, which was left extraordinarily vague, splitting into contradictory directions. Washington read it as a trade, lift the blockade for open waterways. But Iran concluded the text granted them absolute control over the strait. Because both sides believed the document guaranteed their preferred outcome, the diplomatic framework failed. Instead, it became the precise mechanism that locked them into an escalating trap. Neither government can easily back down right now, because both are facing intense domestic pressures that demand a decisive victory over a prolonged standoff. For the U.S. administration, the clock is ticking on the upcoming midterm elections. As domestic gas prices rise in response to the blocked shipping lanes, the president is leaning into maximum threat tactics to force a quick, favorable resolution. Across the globe, Iran's civilian population is reeling from severe economic devastation. Driven by heavy economic sanctions and relentless military strikes, the country is grappling with a staggering 80% inflation rate and millions of job losses. Yet despite that financial ruin, the leaders in Tehran view control over the Strait of Hormuz as an absolute, non-negotiable red line. To them, relinquishing the waterway would mean surrendering their national sovereignty. To counter overwhelming U.S. military power, Iran is signaling a different, asymmetric tactic. They are threatening to leverage their Houthi proxy forces in Yemen to choke off completely separate shipping routes, like the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. This creates a dangerous paradox. Massive military and economic superiority cannot force compliance when the weaker nation believes submitting is worse than enduring the punishment. This stubborn deadlock between Washington and Tehran is bleeding outward, freezing other critical peace processes across the Middle East. For instance, Israel and Lebanon recently held talks in Rome to negotiate the creation of new pilot zones along the southern Lebanese border. The framework requires a specific sequence of events on the ground. First, the disarmament of Hezbollah forces in these selected villages, followed by the complete withdrawal of Israeli soldiers, and finally the deployment of the Lebanese military. But much like the U.S.-Iran memorandum, implementation is indefinitely delayed due to deep mutual distrust. Without a firm timeline, Israeli troops remain in the buffer zone, and tens of thousands of local residents remain displaced from their destroyed homes. The entire region is stuck in a holding pattern, where diplomatic frameworks are successfully drafted in meeting rooms, but become completely paralyzed on the ground by mutual suspicion. We are now watching a high-stakes game of chicken. Both governments are absorbing massive financial and military damage, each betting that the other side will blink first. The stakes of that standoff are getting dangerously high. The president's threat to hit targets like power plants and bridges approaches a severe legal boundary, as international humanitarian law strictly prohibits attacks on sites considered essential for civilian survival. This puts the U.S. military in an incredibly difficult position. Service members are legally prohibited from obeying orders that violate international law, meaning the targeted destruction of civilian infrastructure could spark a crisis within the chain of command itself. Meanwhile, the reality on the ground in Iran is already severe. Coastal communities in the south have been devastated by the naval blockade and continuous bombings, ruining local fishing industries and causing mounting civilian casualties. To prevent this from spiraling into an all-out war, international mediators from countries like Qatar and Pakistan are working frantically behind the scenes to find a diplomatic loophole regarding the shipping lanes. Escaping the escalation trap doesn't require overwhelming military force anymore. It requires a carefully constructed, face-saving exit ramp, a compromise that allows both sides to declare victory, pack up, and go home before the entire region collapses.